Fergus, thank you for joining me. I'm really pleased to have you. Um, how have you been handling the past crazy few months?
Yeah, it's been strange, but I've been lucky. I think it's not been too bad. But yeah, hopefully when things get back to normal, we're able to adapt back to to what it was like before.
Yeah, I guess that there is an adaptation process once things open up. So tell me a bit about your sort of research. What currently are you looking at?
Yeah, so my research mainly looks at um, how machine learning is applied to security sensitive tasks. So tasks like malware detection, classification, intrusion detection, things like this. Um, because machine learning has lots of obvious advantages, like applying AI to stuff. Seems like such a great idea, right? Because it's automated, so you can reduce the kind of manual effort, the cost, the expertise that you need. It scales with the data, so the more data you have, the more powerful it is, and we have loads of data. And sometimes it's even better than humans. You get like superhuman performance. And for
Mm-hmm.
stuff like machine translation, these like amazing benefits of being able to communicate with someone even if you don't speak the same language. But there are issues too. So um, often we don't understand exactly what's happening. Like we have these complex algorithms processing the data, and most of the time we get some amazing output, but it's not always clear how that outcome was arrived at. And
Mm-hmm.
the other issue is that they assume some kind of stationarity, so um, that the thing you're trying to learn isn't going to change, like why you're trying to learn it or why you're trying to apply it to predict new things or however you're applying it. And in security, usually that's not the case. In security, usually um, there's an adversary that's trying to actively change what they're doing, to evade your system, to manipulate your system, and stuff like that. So there's kind of this collision between AI and security that's been happening for the past 10 years or so. And we're starting to understand more and more like what are the limitations of applying machine learning to these security problems, and how can we uh, you know make the most of it or overcome these challenges.
And how much of a how new of a field is this? Because I mean, machine learning, artificial intelligence is really taken, it's really becoming commercialized only recently. Like it hasn't been commercialized that much in the past. So how much of a how new is this field of sort of trying to understand it from a security perspective?
Yeah, I think it, especially in the last 5 years, probably there's been the most amount of focus on it, but it does kind of go back longer. Like you have people playing with statistical methods for doing things like detecting malware and detecting online attackers and so on.
Mm-hmm.
But kind of a kind of a catalyst for not panic, but like academic wariness was this discovery that certain systems like neural networks that are very well suited to tasks like image classification can be there are certain inputs that you can give to the system which completely and arbitrarily you know manipulate the decision of the classifier.
Mm-hmm.
um, so you can have, I mean, the classic example is you have an image of a panda and you want to say what it's of, right? But you can add some very light random noise to the image, and it still looks like a panda to a human, but to the machine, it can be classified as whatever you want, another animal or whatever other
Mm-hmm.
classes you have in the system. And that caused a lot of, oopsie daisy, like we're so excited about artificial intelligence. And this is the kind of technology we're going to put in self-driving cars to recognize, um, you know, speed limit signs and things like this. And the idea that you can manipulate it in a way which is imperceptible to humans, but can really alter the decision of the AI or the machine learning system, kind of makes you want to step back and think, well, okay, is there anything else? And that's really been in the last 5 years, I'd say, a little longer, but the focus has been there.
Mm-hmm. And as you mentioned, so an adversary would manipulate a machine learning algorithm in what in how many ways, you know, or what potential ways?
So the classic example is evasion. That's kind of the most obvious example. So an example I give, which I mentioned to you, previously, is you have a typical machine learning class task like image classification. So given a photo, is it a cat or is it a dog? And this is the kind of technology that Apple and Google use to categorize photos on your phone and things like this. And in this context, the data doesn't change. The cats are always cats and the dogs are always dogs, hopefully. But if we imagine like some alternative dimension where there's this, I don't know, some apocalyptic event pits cats and dogs against each other, and so there's a cat nation and the dog empire, and they're at war with each other. And this same technology can be applied for like facial recognition. So it's something that the dog empire might want to use to keep the cats out. Mm-hmm. So whenever a citizen crosses the border, you check is it a cat or is it a dog? But in this instance, the cats are motivated to evade the system, right? Mm-hmm. So they can put on a little disguise and they can act extra dog-like, mm-hmm. Wag the tail and whatever. And this violates like the assumptions of the system. And this causes all sorts of problems when you look at this in real life. Like, this is what malware authors do when they're trying to evade antivirus detection. Mm-hmm. And it causes like this gradual shift where, at time A, you thought the malware you were trying to detect looked like this. But as they respond to your system, they notice that they're not getting through anymore. They start to adapt their techniques. Mm-hmm. So that's the main issue. But there are more kind of insidious attacks as well. For example, maybe I'm training my system, but the attacker is able to give me some of the training examples. So maybe when the cats and the dogs, when the dogs specifically are training the system, there's already cats that have infiltrated the dog empire. Mm-hmm. So when they're saying, okay, so we're going to learn that these are dogs, but actually there's a few cats in there already with their disguises on. So this is a poisoning attack where the attacker is manipulating, what you thought was true to begin with was actually never true. Mm-hmm.
So let me not say how, but are there examples of such attacks happening? Whether it's the classical example, whether this poison attack, are there examples that have sort of affected companies or affected organizations or affected even nations?
That's a good question. I mean, it's something that comes up a lot. So evasion is like, it's as old as security itself, probably. Mm-hmm. Like for as long as you've had computers and networks, people have wanted to abuse them, to use them to commit crime. And then you've tried to protect against it and they've adapted. It's this cat and mouse conflict. Mm-hmm. And now looking at it from a perspective where the system being abused is based on AI, it's kind of the same old game, but with new techniques, new technologies, new consequences. But for these more complex attacks, there's a bit of a debate about how applicable they are. So, I mean, in security, the idea is that we want to figure out the attacks before they happen. But of course, there's always this kind of paradox where you might be inventing the attack, which then gets picked up by the bad guys. But hopefully, when you propose the attack, you also propose the defense so that you avoid this problem. Probably another aspect, which is like there's another class of attacks which, rather than being like security attacks, are privacy attacks. So you can kind of infer properties of the model, which might enable you to leak information from the model, to learn like what it's been trained on, which is problematic in terms of, let's say you're a large technology company and you have access to lots of people's photos and things, and you use it to train your image classifier, and then what they often do is they release these models. Because they have access to so much data, they release the model, and then someone with less data can fine tune it on their own application, so it still gets quite good performance. Now, if like you would not usually expect any of the original data to be in the model, because it's been stringified, like it's been turned into some abstract numerical concept, right? But there are possible ways to kind of reverse this process and from the model get the data. And if that's images of you and me hanging out and our private situations, then it's problematic.
So, what was the impetus that drove you to researching these sort of adversarial attacks in ML?
I don't know. It was a pretty random process, probably, to be honest. I was always really skeptical about AI and ML, to be honest. So when I was doing my undergrad, I did my undergrad in computer science and security, and I skipped the kind of big data class because I was like, it's all just a load of hype. It's not such an important thing. But then when I started my PhD, I was, I guess became a little more open-minded about the I don't know whether AI revolution is like a overblown way of saying, what's happening, but it certainly is very useful to so many tasks. It's going to have a big effect on the way that we're able to do day-to-day things. And for lots of security tasks, it seems pretty well suited, right? Because the expertise and time that goes into like that you need to reverse engineer malware or perform forensics after an attack is pretty huge, and the amount of attacks that occur are like enormous. Like there's so many. Like it's like, I don't know, it's hard to comprehend like just how much attack activity is going on all the time. But then these situations where machine learning breaks down is super interesting. So like, I think to a security person, this is kind of what gets you hooked. It's when things you have a system that you understand and you know how it should work, but then it starts to break down. It doesn't work how you wanted it to. And that's just like, I think that's what people in security like the most. So after that, it was like, oh, this is awesome. I mean, and then once you realize there's so many different like manifestations of this, it kind of, I mean, you just can't stop, because it just goes on forever. I mean, one interesting application is like the reverse. So let's say there's a nation state that that uses machine learning to detect, let's say, when someone accesses a website that they're not supposed to. There's a big list of censored websites or information you're not allowed to access, and they use machine learning to catch their citizens. As a citizen, you can apply these attacks to evade that censorship. So it's not necessary. I mean, from my perspective, this isn't necessarily a bad thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this is like an application which isn't particular. Like, I don't work on censorship and stuff, but having discovered that there's this application, I mean, it's like, oh wow, now there's even more stuff. And I suppose that's kind of, when I started my undergrad, I was like, oh wow, there's so much stuff. And then when I started specializing in security, I was like, oh wow, there's even more stuff. And then when I started AI, it's like, oh wow, there's even more stuff. And that like perpetuates, I guess.
And I suppose for security, the interesting thing is that there's so many applications for security, and you know, for whether it's on a national level or whether it's a commercial level, whether it's banking or whether it's just a company that might hold some of your private information. I guess there's an enormous sort of jungle of applications that you can have when it comes to sort of these ML technologies, and even seeing where they break down. So is it? Do you think on a national level is where it's being taken most seriously, or is it just is the industry as a whole keen to sort of get to sort of breakthroughs?
You mean in terms of the AI part?
Yeah, and in terms of the AI and or the security aspect of AI.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's something that industry has taken more and more seriously as time has gone by, because I mean, the main, I guess the main, they have two different responsibilities, I suppose. So the government's main responsibility in terms of AI that I know of is like protecting people's data, which they may want to use for certain stuff. Industry, the adversary is usually like like someone trying to make money. Sometimes it's the government. I mean, sometimes these different parties get pitted against each other, but that kind of changes their perspective, I suppose. I hope it's something that everyone's taking more seriously now. I mean, it's a time will tell kind of situation, I suppose. For example, in the automotive industry, from what I believe, it's like, yeah, I mean, you can do these attacks. So with the speed limit, you know, with the image recognition that's being used to detect traffic signs and such, there are attacks where you can get a little sticker which is specifically crafted in a certain way, and you put it on the speed limit sign, and the vehicle thinks it's a different speed limit. So this can be shown pretty well. I mean, this is known that this is possible. But I don't know. I mean, this is either part of the design or their response. But the automotive industry, they're not going to rely entirely on the sensors, on the vision and the proximity sensors and whatever, because these are things that can be fooled. So you're going to have like mechanical, engineering safeguards, fail safes, so that you have redundant systems and this kind of thing, which is nice to know, right? Otherwise, you're in this position where it takes like a big disaster for people to take stuff seriously, and you don't want to get to that. if it's academics imagining theoretical attacks which will never come to pass, I think that's okay. At least we can have some fun. But if it's the other way around and you're not taking something seriously, and then there's a huge crash on the motorway or an abuse of this technology, then it's regrettable situation.
Is that how things have evolved in cybersecurity in general? When has it evolved as a result of like these major sort of incidents?
Only in some senses. I think it's evolved based on a fear of these circumstances, like on these things. I think cryptography specifically has been driven a lot by, for example, government abuses into and surveillance and things like this, especially Snowden and NSA revelations, GCHQ revelations. This was such an amazing revelation that technology was being abused, that it drove a lot of, because there were a lot of things that came out that were hypothetical kind of attacks, but knowing that nation states were employing them really gave a lot of firm direction to cryptographers. In other areas such as exploitation, network intrusion, vulnerability detection, there have been certain events like the Stuxnet attack, where somebody, a nation state of some kind, attacked via electronic means physical systems, which is they were centrifuge systems, if I remember correctly. But it mirrors this fear that our infrastructure depends more and more on technology, and that somebody, either another hackers employed by another country or terrorists or whatever, can take advantage of that. And then similarly for privacy, all of the huge breaches of user data, of secret information, personal information, not being protected properly by companies, especially, and being leaked out and sold on black markets and such and such. That's also kind of a catalyst. But I think we haven't seen, something super terrible. I mean, these are all terrible things, I think, or depending on whose side you're on in each of these things. But there hasn't. I think there's a possibility of an event, not to fearmonger or anything like that, but I mean, there is the possibility of some kind of event, like a war which is committed electronically, right? And has a lot of, and disrupts public life a lot, and hopefully that never happens. But if that does happen, I think it will completely change the way that we think about security, that we implement security and stuff like that. So touch wood.
So let me ask you, when it comes to sort of technology, historically there's always been the metaphorical arms race between nations. When it comes to cybersecurity, or when it comes to security, especially with regards to ML and artificial intelligence, is there the equivalent race between superpowers, whether it's like the US and China and Russia or the UK? Is there a race, and if so, who is showing signs that they are a dominant force?
Like in terms of different nations specifically, it's tricky because let me think before I speak. But because the thing with AI, which makes it weird, is that expertise isn't enough typically. and resources isn't enough. So for example, in security, in just security, there are clear actors, players who are well suited to doing security stuff, whether it's attack, whether it's defense. You know, UK, USA, France, Germany, Israel, China. They know what they're doing. They have really specific teams and kind of research infrastructures and strategies and such and such. Russia as well have their own strategies and whatever. But with AI, you need data as well. And however it happened, look, most of the data is in the hands of corporations, right? Whether it's Facebook, Google, Apple, Tencent, Huawei, whatever. And they're kind of a third. I don't know. They're like that. Do they belong to a country? I don't know. They operate in one country. They're global. They promise that they'll be really good. They seem to have societal benefit. They seem to be transparent. But it's early days in terms of, you know, the grand scheme of things. So they certainly are coming out on top. Because, for example, if I wanted to start, if someone wanted to start a competing business, you kind of need the data first in order to compete. So there's kind of a barrier to entry there. But how it relates to kind of geopolitical, how would you say, like the balance of geopolitical power is hard to say, because, you know, they're kind of independent or seem to be independent, but maybe not. But yeah.
So how far into your research are you at the moment?
I should be getting. I think I have about a year left. So
okay, so almost at the finish line.
Yeah, I mean, it's all a blur, right? So I'm not really sure how long it's been. But yeah.
And what's your experience been like in the CDT so far?
I mean, the CDT was a great program, has been a great program. I mean, the coolest thing about it is, like, the first year of the CDT at Royal Holloway, you have more of a broad. They try and like give you some context, right? Because, for example, taking me, like, what I come from a technical background, and I would have loved to just start like doing technical stuff in my little bubble, right? I'd be quite comfortable just just getting on with that. But yeah, and I would probably, I mean, at that time had more of a kind of arrogant perspective about, you know, the role of technology in security. Like, that's all that really matters, you know. That's where the hardcore stuff is, you know. It's all about like bits and bytes and stuff. But in that first year, it kind of opens, like, not to be hyperbolic, but like opens your eyes, right? Because you're working with sociologists and geographers and law and politics people, and you realize that there's a lot more to security than just that. So, I mean, also, what's important to learn, I think, is that you know, as a beginner security PhD, is that there might not be technological solutions to certain problems. So, like, with a technology like facial recognition, it's not just a cat and dog problem. It's like a real world problem. So, like, facial recognition is it could be a very beneficial technology, but it could also be abused by, for example, you know, police forces, security forces, as a way of automating surveillance and what that leads to. But it's not. I mean, it's not clear if there would be like a technical safeguard to allow you to use the technology for one thing, but not to allow it to be abused by another group, like a majority group or powerful group. And that's when, you know, you need sociologists or people with that kind of social expertise to try to quantify the harm that it might do to people and this kind of thing. And you need legal experts to think about pragmatic solutions like regulation or legislation, which can curb these abuses. And that's something I probably wouldn't have considered. I would have been stuck in my bubble, like fiddling with the bits and the bytes, which I still do, but without this context, you know, that security is about conflict. It's not just about, you know, technology, computers and stuff.
Well, that's a very, very interesting perspective because, you know, I've heard the opposite sides of, you know, people saying, like, you know, people wanting to do cybersecurity or get into cybersecurity and not having the technical background, and but then realizing that their sort of their own background is in itself valuable. But it's really interesting to hear it from a technical perspective, and this because fundamentally cybersecurity is technical. At the heart of it is technical, but to see that you sort of appreciated the CDT's sort of expansion on what cybersecurity means for the world in general and the implications it has on geopolitics and sort of partnerships in the world is really, really interesting. So do you have anything in mind once you sort of finish your PhD where in what you'll do? Do you want to carry on in academia or do you want to sort of get into industry?
Oh man, you can't ask that question. You want me to think ahead to the future? It's pretty scary, man.
Or maybe you could just join the Cat Nation.
Yeah, I'll defect, and yeah, they've got it good over there, I hear. I think I want to stay in research. I love research, so but if it's academic or industrial research, I'm not sure. But yeah.
No, I mean it's good enough. It's good. So yeah,
About it when I'm sat on my sofa broke, thinking, "Oops, I forgot to apply to anything."
I'm sure that's not going to happen, man. I'm sure there's going to be tons of attacks for you to deter. Are you on Twitter by any chance?
Yeah, I am, but I don't use it much. But
where can people find you online?
yeah, they can find me on Twitter with 0x trusty patches. That's about it, really. Yeah. Otherwise, seek me out and become my friend, and I'll add you on Facebook or something. That's the other alternative.
And obviously, we'll link your profile from the CDT onto the video, so people can reach you there.
Yeah, we also have so my main supervisor is now at King's College, London. So we have a site there. The lab's called S2 Lab. I think it's like s2lab.kcl.ac.uk. And there you can find more information about all the projects that we're working on and the papers that we've put out recently, and you know, members of the team and whatever. So we have a bit more. You can get a bit more of an idea about the kinds of issues that we work on that we talked about. You know, AI security, application to malware, and this kind of stuff is all there. So.
And what advice would you give to anyone with a technical background that wants to sort of get into cybersecurity in general, as like when you sort of reflect on your own experience?
I guess just take time to look around and find something that really gets you excited, because it's a huge area, and I mean, there's like, there's applications and things that you've never like heard of, you could never dream of. So I mean, dig around and find what really, you know, gets you excited, and then focus on that, because yeah, you won't be disappointed if you do that, right?
No, absolutely. That's fantastic advice. Fergus, I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope to catch up with you sometime soon.
Yeah, thanks, man. It's been a lot of fun. So best of luck with everything.
Cheers.